My exhibition presents experimental films of the 1930s to 40s, featuring works from Oskar Fischinger, Len Lye, and Maya Deren. Experimental film, also known as avant-garde cinema, is a mode of filmmaking which is unconventional and steps away from the typical techniques used in cinema. As this is quite a modern topic, this exhibition will be shown at the Tate Modern. This brings together 7 films, which together explore the diversity of techniques available in the medium of film, including stop-motion animation, stencil animation, and more. Most of the films shown are accompanied by music and is especially vital in Oskar Fischinger's works, so each film would be shown in separate basic rooms which are all quite dark to mimic the intense atmosphere of a theatre and to allow the films to be seen more clearly. This simplistic style would make the films the focus of the rooms, and the viewer's eye would also naturally be brought to the most colourful part of the room. Typically, the film is projected onto one of the walls and seating is provided in rows in front of the screen, but in order to isolate the viewer from their surroundings, there would be little stations around the room where the film is projected smaller with headphones for each person. This would allow the viewer to provide their full attention to the film. The first experimental film shown is Oskar Fischinger's An Optical Poem. An optical poem is an abstract film created by Fischinger in 1938 to Frank Liszt's Second Hungarian Rhapsody, which creates a visual symphony of the music through brightly coloured, two-dimensional shapes, which dance to invoke the same reaction from the viewer as listening to the piece of music accompanying it would. This seems unnatural as art and music, which appeal to different senses, are able to create the same effect on the audience, but Fischinger does this impeccably. For instance, the sharp and staccato movement of the shapes mimic and create the same response from the viewer as staccato notes in the music. Oskar Fischinger created this film by suspending paper on invisible wires which could sway easily, so used a broomstick with a feather attached to it to act as a steadier before taking his exposure. This was made with stop-motion animation, meaning it was shot one frame at a time and would have taken a painstakingly long time to create. The simplicity of the shapes made sure the film stayed abstract with no meaning except to portray the emotions of the music, and when they are in colour, the effect is emphasized. This was particularly interesting to me, as personally, art and music can act as an escape from reality, so combining the two together creates a mesmerizing experience where you can get entranced by the swaying of circles and the colors dancing across the screen. Not only does Fischinger show how stop motion can be used to expand music into more than just sound by creating it in a different form, but also work towards removing the idea of narrative in cinema and minimizing it to a simple movement, color and rhythm, and so changing the definition of cinema from then on. The next film is Kaleidoscope by Len Lye, made in 1935. This is also an abstract animated film consisting of colourful patterns and shapes which are constantly changing over a jazzy and circus-like soundtrack. The different patterns move swiftly from one another, making it seem like the images are moving and transforming into the next fluidly. Lye was interested in creating animations that conveyed, as he said, a body energy and a feeling of a zizz, so created movement out of simple shapes and patterns by painting or scratching directly onto each frame of the film strip, so when the film strip was played, it would be similar to stop-motion animation, as each frame would play swiftly after the last, making the images look like they were moving. This process is direct animation, where the film strip is treated like a long canvas, which can take a small action, like a scratch, and amplify it to a huge graphic image on the screen. He also used stencil animation, where the stencil is spread over multiple film frames, so when they are projected in succession, the stencil turns into a moving image. In these frames from Kaleidoscope, one stencil is repeated 3 times in 2 different colours, which turns into a complicated flurry of triangles whizzing by. Len Lye's experimental films were created as advertisements for things like post office products or Shell Oil, and Kaleidoscope was created to advertise Churchman cigarettes. As advertisements were shown in cinemas across the country, this meant Lye's films were seen by larger audiences than any other experimental art of the period. It was vital to include Len Lye in this exhibition, as due to his increased exposure in advertising, he was able to introduce the general public into artistic movements like abstraction and surrealism. He also shows the diverse uses and techniques of film, as he doesn't use a camera to film and is able to create kinetic and pulsing images out of simple, repetitive shapes and patterns. The third film shown is Maya Deren's Meshes of the Afternoon, created in 1943, which is a short, black and white film with narrative. Maya Deren believed the function of film was to create an experience and incorporated her passion of dance, Haitian voodoo, and focused on the human body and psychology. It starts with a woman, played by Deren, falling asleep on a couch, where in her dream she encounters a mysterious hooded figure whom she chases but fails to catch. This happens repeatedly, and with each failure, she returns to the house where specific household items reappear, like a key, a knife, a piece of bread, or a flower, and her surroundings become more and more disorientated. Through different film techniques, such as extreme camera angles, slow motion, and creative editing, it creates a different reality which gets harder and harder for the woman to understand. Finally, multiplied into 3 versions of herself, one, seemingly different from the rest, attempts to kill her sleeping body, but she is woken up by a man, only to find out that physical reality also follows the dreamlike logic of her imagination and ultimately causes her death. Although this film has a narrative, it is quite hard to understand as it blurs together like a dream as you watch it, and just results in an overall mood of the film with no clear answers. There are so many meanings buried in this film with every object and character that there is no clear analysis and every viewer can come to their own conclusion. It manages to blur the barrier between imagination, reality, and dual reality by the repetition of her actions and multiplying of the main character. This film could be seen as Deren's views on a woman's place in a male-dominated society, or the concept of eternal return that the universe has been recurring and will continue to recur across infinite time and space. But ultimately, you have to see it yourself and come to your own conclusions about what Deren is trying to convey. This experimental film contrasts greatly with the previous 2, as they catch attention through bright colours and quick movement, whereas Deren's film is black and white, and catches people's attention through the narrative and the camera angles, while only using amateur filming equipment. Meshes of the Afternoon was necessary to have in this exhibition as it developed the film style of European avant-garde filmmakers of the 1920s and influenced the tone and style of other films for the next decade. Maya Deren creates the opposite effect on cinema than Fischinger, as instead of minimizing narrative in films, the action on screen in her film urges the viewer to look deeper into the symbolism and make something more of the pieces used. Other experimental films shown at this exhibition include Ritual in Transfigured Time, Aimless Walk by Hamid, Norman McLaren's Love on the Wing, and Swimming Champion by Jean Therese. This exhibition shows the importance of experimental film as it develops the idea of what cinema is by creating unconventional approaches to making films. It shows that film can have diverse uses and can act as a universal language to convey a broad range of things, like music to advertising, or even question the boundary of psychological reality. Deren once said, "A truly creative work of art creates a new reality," which perfectly encases these films, as they can transport viewers into an alternate dimension when watching. But more importantly, these avant-garde films, by going against conventional filmmaking, can change the definition and direction of cinema from then on.